Hey everybody, I'm Gigi Rosenberg, and I'm here today with Dave Lupinsky. I met Dave several years ago, but the time that I saw him that really stood out to me was 1 year ago. I was in Texas at a meeting, and I walked into a hotel ballroom which had maybe 50 to 100 people in it, and it was an insurance executive meeting. And at the front of the room, I saw a guy, it was Dave, and he was talking as if I were sitting in his kitchen at his table and he was talking right to me. I was at the back of the room, he was at the front of the room. There were tons of other people there. And I was like, wow, how does this guy do this? So I invited Dave to come talk to us today to see how he, no matter how many people in the room, helps the audience feel like they're sitting right at his kitchen table. Dave is a VP of clinical product solutions at a company called Paradigm, which is in the workers' comp world. He joined Paradigm after 16 years at Corvell. He lives in California. He holds a degree in biomechanics from UC Davis. And he also once worked as a program director at Community Youth Center, using sports and athletics to teach kids life skills. And we're also going to be talking about his former years as a gymnast and as a wrestler. Welcome, Dave. I am so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Gigi. I mean, what a great compliment. I think that's really hearing that it sounded like you were just sitting in my kitchen is such a treat for me because that's really the goal of what I try to do in the smaller groups or even in the bigger groups. So it was great to hear that's what came across.
So, what I want to know is how do you do that? Because I find that skill is so rare and also sometimes hard to teach, especially when someone's very nervous. So, was that your style always, or was that something you developed in yourself? And if you did, how did you do it?
Yeah, I think like with anything, there's repetition. So I won't say it was a style that I wanted to emulate. I think from, it is just like with athletics, you look at kind of figures where you're like, ooh, I like those pieces of what they do. And so I can remember watching presentations and having that same feeling that you just described. Like, oh, I feel like they're almost talking right to me. And when I'm up there presenting, that's when I feel the best. That's when I feel connected to the audience is when I'm talking like it's just, a smaller group and they're in the kitchen and it feels very relaxed. I would kind of draw that as like akin to kind of the zone state. So it doesn't always get there. I definitely don't think that's how my presentation started. I think just with repetitions and kind of knowing the feeling that I wanted to get to, that when I'm in the zone, when I'm in a good place and feeling very comfortable, it leads to that type of connection with the group.
So, how do you get to that state of being comfortable enough that you can get in the zone? What does it take? Is that just something that comes to you automatically, or is there some kind of rehearsal? And you said reps. When you say reps, what, are you talking about a rehearsal? What do you mean exactly?
Yeah, reps are definitely getting your repetitions in, so doing it multiple times. And I'll talk a little bit about athletics and kind of what it took to do that because it's just terrifying. Like sometimes speaking in front of groups, it's when you're wrestling, you're in front of a group, you don't know what's going to happen, but you have done these techniques, we'll call them, thousands and thousands of times. I would never go out in a wrestling tournament and try a move I just learned 5 minutes ago. So for me, what gives me comfort is doing the work ahead of time and then a lot of it is the preparation, and these are tools that you've given me, is what can I do to kind of bring myself to that right kind of state? I don't want to be too excited, but I don't want to be too relaxed. And you can't always do this, but what I try and do is optimize as much as I can. Can I get a workout a couple of hours before? Not always possible, but if it's possible, do it. Do a brisk walk. Do some repetitions of, you like to talk about the initial line, the opening. I don't like to memorize everything I'm saying because I want it to be free flowing, but I want that opening to start off really smooth because that kind of sets the tone for how the rest of that interaction is going to go. But I think the biggest thing is for me just building that confidence by going through the process multiple times. I've had people say, well, that looks like you just got up there and talked. And that's the best compliment you can get. But I never do that. The fact that it looks comfortable and that I just got up there is all an illusion. These are things that, usually I've practiced for months and months before I've gotten in front of a group.
Wow, that is so great. Because so many people I work with who want to have that sense of ease, they think, well, I wasn't born with it, so what can I do? And I always say the easier it looks, the more work it took to put into it. And so that just confirms what my experience has been. So some people might not know this, but as a kid, you told me that you enjoyed breakdancing. And then you taught yourself tumbling, which I guess most people would call gymnastics, right? And I'm sure this was more than just like somersaults. And then you were spotted at the YMCA by a gymnast who then had you doing competitive gymnastics in high school. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, this
Wow.
was back in the 80s. I had parachute pants and linoleum that I took around everywhere. And I think also, and I loved ninja movies. So doing a backflip was just like that was the ultimate thing to me. So it just again, lots of repetitions. Gymnastics is a great example of that. You see them do these acrobatic tricks, and you have no idea as to the number of repetitions you have to go through to get it to look the way like it's not something that you just try right away. And luckily they have tools to kind of make it a softer landing. So to draw an analogy back to this, they'll have what's called tumbling foam pits, so you can do flips into this pit of foam to learn your tricks. And I would do the same thing in terms of like public speaking. Don't do your first one in front of 1,000 people. Get your
Yeah.
wife, put her in a room, try and draw the same ambiance. Do it just like you would if you were going to do it, in a competition, but it's a softer landing, right? Set yourself up so you can have some falls, you can make those mistakes before you're in front of the big group.
Oh my God. I love that. I love that. So, anything else you've learned from your wrestling experience and from your being a gymnast experience that you feel applies or helps you as a speaker? We talked about the rehearsal, and I love the foam pits. I mean, it's like, what kind of foam pit do you need as a speaker so that you can practice when the stakes are very, very low and there's
Yeah.
no worry about getting hurt? So anything else you learned from wrestling that you apply to your speaking?
Yeah, I think both of those things require you to perform in front of a large group. And, I mean, between the two of them, that's a lot of leotards. I'm in a leotard in both of those. So you're really exposed. You're by yourself. And candidly, it's terrifying. And so, both in gymnastics and in wrestling, what you really don't want to happen, you don't want to make this big mistake and fall down in front of a big group. And the reality is, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And what at least I felt like I learned from it is it's never as bad as you thought it was going to be. It's not great. You don't want to do that again, but it takes a little bit away to say, yeah, I can fall down and I can get back up and keep going and I'm going to be okay. And that takes away, I think sometimes we would call it catastrophizing. We make that situation, oh, if I fall down and everyone sees me, I'm going to be embarrassed forever. The reality is the audience, they might go, oh, that was a little strange, but they're probably more worried about their own appearances and other things they have going on. So it's actually helpful to go through that process and have those missteps. You learn to take your lumps and to work through them.
That's great. I love that. And also the other thing, at least with speaking, which I don't think is true with gymnastics or wrestling, is if you make a gigantic blooper, you can always call it out. And
You can.
sometimes that's the fun when you, especially when you call it out, it can be the funniest thing. It's like when a comedian tells a joke and no one laughs, and then he says something like, it's funny when I practiced that at home, I thought it was going to land better, or my wife thought it was really funny, or whatever, and then that gets the laugh. So that's so interesting. So let me ask you something about the thing about performing, because I actually try not to use that word with clients because they get nervous about feeling like it's a performance. But that feeling of getting up there and that everyone's staring at you, that's part of being a performer with gymnastics and wrestling, a lot of so many kinds of athletics. And that's also something that people struggle with public speaking. So do you ever feel like, oh, everyone's staring at me? I hate that. Or how do you deal with that moment when you're walking up there, whether it's to bat or to the mat to do your thing, or if it's to the
Mhm.
microphone, and that feeling of everyone staring at you, is that an issue for you? And if it is, how do you deal with it?
It's definitely an issue. So as many times if I competed in gymnastics or wrestling, when my name got called and you have to walk out there, it was still terrifying. Every time, it was still terrifying. And so what changed for me is I try not to make myself the feel. So I don't say I am scared, I am I don't try and make it work. What I try and do is notice it. And I even use language to separate myself from it. Like, oh, there is nervousness. Like, there's that feeling. I know that
Mm.
feeling. There it is. But I try and distance myself. Not I am nervous. There is nervousness. But I still feel it. I feel it. Sometimes we'll do basic introductions where the mic gets passed around. And all I have to do is say my name and who I work for. And, that gets me nervous. So again, I think that the key part is just acknowledging, oh, that's the feeling. I'm aware of that. I know what to do with that. And just seeing that it's there, noticing it, but then continuing to just move through your program.
And it sounds like as you continue, that feeling starts to subside.
It does. It does,
Yeah.
especially, and that's
Yeah.
partly why I would like to, and I took advice from you of memorizing my first line, because you
Yeah.
do a strong opening, and it's almost like you and the audience can go, and you start to breathe, and then things can start to flow.
So, one thing I'm wondering about is your style is so conversational that the audience does have a feeling of, oh, we're talking with him, even though maybe all we're doing is nodding or whatever. But when you want to get the audience a little more involved with some kind of participation, what do you do to bring the audience out when you're talking to them so that what I try to avoid is an audience that's sitting back. I want one that's sitting up and alert. So is there anything you do when you're trying to get them to participate?
Yeah, what I'll try and do is it's interesting you mentioned the nodding. I'll look for nodding. So it could be, and it depends on the size of the group. Sometimes you're presenting to a group of maybe, 6 to 8 people. Other times you're presenting to a group of 100 people, and so it could be a little different. We'll go with the smaller group, but if I see, I'm trying to look at their eyes, and they could be nodding yes, which is a good sign. But I'll look for the one nodding. No, I don't know. No, no way. And sometimes I'll say, "Oh, I saw that." It doesn't, and I'll want to talk through it with them because if they have an objection to something that you brought up, or I'd like to bring that out and talk through it with the group. So I tend in the smaller groups, and this is a little bit more towards the sales focus of things. I'm looking more for the head that's going no than I am the one that's going yes. And if they are not no, I'll try and look and bring it out.
Right, right. So I love that, because I think what happens is, and I've been here too, a speaker can be so nervous, they're not really looking at the audience, and they're afraid of the ones who are not agreeing. But your energy is so much like, oh, let's talk to the ones who have objections. So that just changes the whole vibe of everything. That's so great.
Yeah.
Well, being in sales, I'm assuming people in sales don't like to be salesy either. I mean, nobody
Yeah.
likes anything that feels salesy. So, how do you make your talks and any presentations you do, because they don't feel salesy, but how do you make them not feel salesy?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, this is, and I can't say for everybody. So I've heard some people say I could sell ice to Eskimos, and I'll be transparent, I could not. So it has to be something that I really believe in, and that's part of it. So I don't feel like, because I think where people get, when I initially heard sales, 18 years ago, I thought of the used car lot trying to get you to do something you really shouldn't do. And that felt like kind of, that turned me off too, of I don't want to do that. But if I really believe something, to me, sales is solving a problem for you. So I want to understand what your problem is. And then what I think is, well, we've got this great thing that could help you. So it never feels about getting someone to do something that isn't good for them. It feels like I want to understand your problem and then help bring you tools to resolve those issues.
So it's more of a giving than you're trying to get them to do something. It's more
Exactly.
giving them something.
Yeah, and so usually when I see the head nod, that's why I'm not afraid to talk through it. Is the head nod might be, well, we don't see that problem, and you say, oh, okay, well, you don't see that as, and so that's okay. Maybe you can have a tool that isn't the right tool for everybody, and so it's okay to say, oh, okay, well, maybe in this setting that wouldn't be a benefit to you. That's great to understand that a little bit further. It's okay to not have the perfect tool.
Yeah, yeah. So walk me through the process of when you know a meeting's coming up. Do you start with making your slides? Do you start with where do you start? I'd love to know, like when you know there's something out there. Let's say it's a month away, so you've got time. How do you start to put something together?
There's some decks that I have just put together, right? So there's some, and I think we all have those where you can give the talk 5B, and I could probably wake up and just give it in my sleep. And then there's another talk. We'll use this as an example where I think we worked together on a keynote where they gave me a topic and I had nothing created. And that was one where that's difficult, for one to think of the amount of time. So if you're thinking 50 minutes of content, I mean, to use the analogy of stand up comics, I've heard of people taking a year to build that much content. So it'll usually start where I will just start jotting down ideas. And I'll kind of know what I want to talk about. And it'll be this general setting of innovation and workers' compensation. Let's use something general. And I'll start jotting down ideas. I kind of draw the analogy to a lump of clay. I get my lump of clay and you start making some cuts. It doesn't have much shape to begin with. And then I start to look for the storyline because it feels strange to me to not have slides that tie in. There needs to be some beginning. What are we going to talk about? The storyline that ties together, and then how you're going to wrap it up. So I'll try and start piecing those things together into some story. And then once I have the story, then I'll start working on images that help tell the story of each slide and the transitions from next to next. And then I start practicing. Once I kind of have it, then I'll do an initial run, and based on that run I'll get feedback, but it's a very iterative process. What I start with and what I end don't even sometimes look like the same thing.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, do you have any tips for people on, because I think a lot of people want to weave stories into really any presentation they do. So, when you have an inkling of a story and then you've got this audience to give it to, how do you decide, like, is this story the right one? How do I shape this story to this need? What are your tips for how to find stories and then how to shape them?
I'll kind of start with the basics of storytelling of like there's a setting, there's a character, right? And I'll lead up to some conflict. And this is when we're using a service. So let's say that we're selling something that's related to opioids. Well, we'll talk about what's happened in the landscape, how opioids have come up, why it's the wrong answer. We'll have this conflict and we'll look for the head nods. And thus, because of that conflict, then you kind of have the solution. So you got to lead them to it. We see a lot of people start with their solution. It has no context. Like they start with the what and not the why. And so I really like to build the story because there should be a why behind your product. Why do I even need this? And so I like to walk them through that first. And because of those things, here's why you need. And then there's kind of a punchline to it. And then I kind of talk through what the pieces of that service are. But I got to lead them up to that point. There has to be the conflict as to why they need it.
Have you ever had like a really tough or like incredibly embarrassing or just complete disaster talk? And, you don't have to share all the details of it, but how did you recover either from whatever it was, a really horrendous case of nerves or something that really went sideways?
I've had more than one of those. I'm going to give you two examples because I think they were both different lessons. The first example was very early in my career, and I just didn't do the work candidly to prepare, and I thought I was going to wing it. And because I didn't do the work, my confidence was really low because I knew
Mm.
myself I didn't do the work. And then as soon as I stumbled, it started circling the drain, right? Because my lack of confidence was there. I've already stumbled, and it just was a painful experience. The lesson learned there was do the work, right? So at the end of that presentation, the positive was I am never going to go in unprepared again. So that was my first early lesson. The second example I'll give, and this one I did a lot of preparation. I'll tell you where I didn't prepare. I was doing a presentation, and I had done things before where I tried to like Zoom people in, and it was just terrible because you don't know what the internet connection is going to be. So I'd actually recorded like this meetings with them, and then I had timed my interaction so it looked like they were on a Zoom, but it was actually a recording. And I had the timing down so well that every time I did a practice run, people would say, I can't believe you had that physician in for the practice run. And so I wouldn't even tell them. I go, I know. I really wanted to run through it. I just made it look like. So I was all ready. And this one I'd really put a lot of repetitions. And this was in front of a large group. So it was all, though, about the timing, right? Because I'd ask a question, I'd click, they'd answer, I'd click. And so it was real. The timing was important. Well, I get up to the front of the stage and I start, and I realize I'm too far away from my clicker to make it to the laptop. The one thing I hadn't tested.
Oh my God.
So here was the positive of it is, to your point, I got to that part. I knew that wasn't going to work because I could not get the clicker. I had to say like next slide. And so now it's going to give away my act. Like it's like the magic act has been found out, right? I can't say next slide and they answer. And so I made a joke. And we all kind of laughed about it. I made fun of my magic trick that didn't work. But the difference was, Gigi, is I had put in so much effort to it. I felt confident up there. And so it felt comfortable, and we got to laugh, even though we laughed at it together. It didn't feel like they were just laughing at me. It felt like I was in on the joke with them, and we were both laughing at this mishap. And I wouldn't say it was my best presentation. It was another lesson learned of check your clicker distance. So there was another
Hmm.
checkbox added to my list, but it was by no means a flop. I left that stage feeling, okay, you did the best that you could with what just happened.
So, what happens when, and I wonder if this ever happens to you, but you only have a very short time to present? Like, who knows? Suddenly the CEO is in the building and you've got 5 minutes to talk to them, or who knows? But if you only have an incredibly short time where there really isn't time for all the reps, what do you do when there's no time, like, let's say 5 minutes to prepare?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you still have to have shortened versions. I mean, I think that's where we call it like the elevator pitch. So, and you will have that. I mean, especially at the senior levels, they're not going to always give you an hour. You're lucky if you get 15 minutes. I would still try and because if you're not, you need to understand what their problem is. So you still need to start with the storytelling. We still need a head nod that yes, that's a problem. And once you got that, you can go into the solution. I think the fear is you don't have time, so you want to jump to the solution and you missed an opportunity there. So if it's such a short time that I can't even get them to tell me what their pain point is, it's probably not worth presenting. You don't want to do the solution before you've defined the problem.
Yeah. So it sounds like listening is a huge part of what you're comfortable and relaxed enough to do in the moment.
Yeah, you have to be. So having people, I'll give you an example of where that didn't happen because I want them to feel like I have a solution that's just for them. So the more time I have to prepare, the more custom I'm going to have it for this prospect. It'll look very different for one prospect versus the next. And as you get better, certain blueprints, certain type of prospects, you might say, this isn't even the right fit. You can tell maybe they don't have the pain points that are right for your solution. But I had someone selling to me this. We were doing telehealth in workers' comp, which is mostly musculoskeletal injuries, and they were all excited to tell me about this new virtual lactation consultant program. And I thought, does this person even know me? And it was like, it just
Right,
felt like they're what are they just selling whatever? Like it's that, and it turned me like I would never buy from them at that point.
right, right. Yeah,
And I
that
want the
totally makes
buyers to
sense.
feel like I know you. I've thought about your I'm here to solve your pain points. We all know the salesperson wants to get a deal, but I don't want a deal unless it's helping the buyer. And so I want them to
Right.
feel that.
I'd love to know if there are any speakers or stand-up comedians or anybody who talks that you've seen that you just enjoy because of something they do, whether it's storytelling or whatever. Anybody come to mind that you really admire?
He's super controversial, so I feel a little fearful naming him, but Dave Chappelle is one of my, and I'll tell you why. And let's take the content out, but it is the storytelling aspect. I mean, he has this ability to, again, I feel like when I watch him, like I'm in his living room, and he just takes you on this ride. And then also he'll take you on a ride, and it's interesting. You don't always see what's coming. And I like that part too of it's even in presentations, sometimes you can give an insight where you're seeing something from a different vantage point, and it's nice when you can see the audience go, "Oh, that's interesting. I don't know I necessarily saw that." So I think that makes it fun to have new insights. For us, it's not we're not trying to be funny, but maybe we're trying to get them to see something that maybe they hadn't seen it that way before.
Right. It could even be just some delightful surprise or another point of view or something
Exactly.
unexpected. It's funny how
Exactly.
we really crave that. That's
Yeah.
great. I love that.
I was just gonna say he also seems so patient. And so to what? Because there's
Mm.
some on there, and I've heard comedians talk about this, if they feel this urgency to get the joke out. So they're very rapid fire in their jokes and punchlines. And he seems like he just has all the time in the world. Like he's up there and he's just taking his time. He's gonna get there. But at the same time, there's such a control of the audience that he's working with.
You just reminded me of something that I wanted to ask you was how do you read a room?
Yeah.
How do you know, oh, they're getting bored? Oh, they're with me. What are you looking at? It can't just be gut because gut you can't trust all the time. So what do you do to read the room?
I mean, I will try and make eye contact with specific it's sometimes talking almost to different areas of the room. And I'm really trying to look at them and see what they're doing, if they're nodding, if you see the phone come out or if something, I don't know if I'll always make a joke about it. It kind of depends on the context, but I'm really trying to look, and you can almost break it up into sections and spending some time talking to that specific section, and looking over at this section and making sure that we're engaging and even walking so they feel like they're part of it's even when it's in a big setting, it can feel a little more intimate as you walk and get a little closer to each piece of them.
And it sounds like you're just taking the information in and not automatically thinking, "Oh, they're quiet, so they must be bored."
Yeah, I mean, I feel
Right?
like you can read a little bit by their face. And if I am getting the sense that they're bored, then I'll try and pick my pace up. There's things that you have to be ready to change. Sometimes that means we used to have a CEO that would say, "Stop building me a watch and just give me the time," meaning you're spending
Right.
too long on the story. Get to the punchline. And you can see, so sometimes, you want to tell the story, but you can tell maybe you're not telling it in a way that's key. They're wanting it to be. And so sometimes you got to get the punchline there to get them back.
What are you seeing when you decide to speed things up?
Yeah, I'll either see that they're not really looking at me or they're not looking.
Okay.
There's kind of an
Okay.
engagement level that you can read by their facial expressions.
Right, right.
Or
Okay.
maybe I've lost them to the technology, which that's a rough one to
Mhm.
kind of see that.
Mhm.
But when they have the kind of glossed over look or kind of like, I'm not really fun. What is he talking about? Like, what's the point of this?
Right,
Then
right.
we got to get them back to the point.
Yeah, yeah. Do you ever ask them questions like, am I going too slow? Am I going too fast? Or anything like that?
If I'm in a comfortable zone, definitely. The
Right.
more comfortable I am, the more that I'd be willing to step outside of, like, I'll call it the standard track and engage them and get
Mm,
some talking going.
great. Wow. Well, as we wrap up here, any other resources you want to share? Anything, it could be anything, a book, a movie, whatever, that just has been inspiring to you as a speaker or an athlete or a tumbler?
Yeah, I think what I would recommend to anyone that's uncomfortable doing it. So we were lucky at Corvell that they brought in a resource like you to help us. But I would encourage everybody. So just like an athlete, I always wanted a coach. And so if you're going to do something, get a coach. It's very nice to have someone like you. I have a mentor that I run through my things with, and the benefit of having that is you have somebody, one that's this independent view and that you know is only looking out for your best interest and hopefully has a comfort level to tell you tough things. And so, I knew when I was presenting to you that I was going to get some tough feedback, but I knew the feedback was only because you wanted me to be at my best. And so
Hmm.
I look at those things when people want to do, whether it be athletics or public speaking, invest in yourself, invest in someone that can help coach you. This is nothing, you have to put in the work. It's the 10,000 hours, and having a coach to
Right.
guide you is essential. I don't know. You can't do it without it.
Great. Well, Dave, thank you so much. This has just been incredible. And there's going to be so much to take away and apply to people's talks, speeches, keynotes, etc.
Well, thank you. It was an honor.
So thanks everybody for joining us. This is Gigi Rosenberg, who's been talking to Dave Lupinsky. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.